Hello there folks, back again for another video. In this one we're going to be sort of going beyond the bounds of what we would normally look at in the Middle-earth strategy battle game, and look at one of my favourite video games that was actually based in Middle-earth, which is The War in the North. This was a game that came out quite a long time ago now. If I just look at the Fellowship trailer, this was 11 years. That's quite a long time. It's making me feel a little bit old. But this came out, just over a decade ago, something like that. And I had a lot of fun playing this. It wasn't a game that I played when it first came out, but when I was able to get my hands on a computer that was able to sort of handle it, really, because I didn't have a console for a very long time. I basically dove in and played through War of the North and had a really fun time with it. And the thing that came to my mind recently was how it would be really cool to see about trying to recreate this using miniatures and the scenarios and the storyline from War in the North in your war games on the tabletop. Now, I'm going to do this from the focal point of it being based around the Middle-earth strategy battle game, so the Games Workshop games, but there's no reason why this can't be done with other systems out there as well, like Rangers of Shadow Deep would be a really good option, I think, for this, especially in that kind of mission-by-mission format. Although you could probably do something like this with, I guess, 5 Leagues from the Borderlands as well would be a pretty nice one to try out for this. But yeah, let's dive in and just have a chat about it as well. So if you don't know about War in the North, the primary focus of it was that it was a sort of multiplayer game, or that you could play it solo as well, where you took control of characters like Andriel here and Farin and stuff, and you would play as these characters who were fighting for the North. So in the game, this Agendaur, who is the big bad, who we'll show off here, has been tasked by Sauron to basically take control of the North. And the Witch King and stuff. So it's similar in concept to the way that they played with the storyline in Lord of the Rings Online, for example. But it basically had this sort of human sorcerer in many ways who has been taken under the wing of the Dark Powers and is looking to try to re-establish themselves in the north of Middle-earth, around side of Angmar, Fornos, Gundabad, that kind of stuff. And essentially you have been tasked with taking him down. Now, the game itself was actually created alongside the movie sort of aesthetics and the movie looks and stuff, and so you meet a lot of characters in it, like Gandalf and Elrond and a whole host of other characters as you travel around and sort of visit places like Bree and Rivendell. So you'll bump into Aragorn and Halbarad and all sorts of different characters like that, and you'll be sort of working alongside them, fighting the fight that wasn't done in the movies or in the books in as much detail. So in the game, you take control of either the ranger style character here, which is one of your human characters. You've got Farin the dwarf with his axe, your proper sort of melee up close fighter. Then you had Andriel, who works as the mage. And then throughout the course of the game, you sort of visit a whole host of different locations. So you go deep into Mirkwood. You visit places like Bree, as I've shown as well there, which is quite nice. You head to the Barrow Downs, which is a really cool section of the game where you start to come up against race and all that kind of stuff. You head all the way into the north, which I think is really awesome. So you go and visit some of the old dwarven keeps and things like that. And you sort of go underground as well and into sort of Fangorn, Mirkwood and all that kind of stuff as well. You will also have an ally on your side in the form of Belaram, as you can see here, your big eagle bro who flies in, kicks ass and takes names for you during the game, which is pretty awesome. And over the course of the game, you basically sort of fight through all the different challenges that Agendaur and his forces put against you, and eventually you bring him down and put him to ruin at the very end of the game. So my kind of cool thinking behind this was it would be really fun to see how you could play around with the concepts of that in a miniatures game. So one of the things that's immediately interesting about it is that you'd be running kind of like scenario based stuff, which we have seen in the game before, obviously. the Quest of the Ring Bearer has a whole host of things where you don't play with masses of characters. You maybe play with 2 or 3 figures for the good side and then maybe a handful for the evil side. So essentially you'd break it down, and I did this for the use as part of a One Ring role-playing game. Hopefully you can see this. See if I can zoom in a little bit. Whoop, there we go. Let's zoom in a bit more. So I basically broke down who the main characters would be. This is for a role-playing game, but I think this would work quite nicely for the miniatures game, and also give you some nice pointers as to kind of how you'd build both boards, but also how you'd introduce different characters and that kind of thing. So you've got Halbarad, you've got Halbarad Strider, Belaram, Agandar, Bagrisar, Nodri, Bruni, and Gorin, Urgost, and you've got all the other characters as well, all the different locations, and sort of how it all flows together through a series of campaigns. Now, this was kind of designed so that it would work for a role-playing game, but there's no reason why you couldn't take this and break it down into scenarios. So, for example, finding the wounded Halbarad at the start. Maybe you base that around the idea of playing out a cool mission where you have a wounded character on the board and you have to drag them off, because obviously there are mechanics for dragging miniatures and things in the Middle-earth strategy battle game. So you include that in the mix, and you have to try and get him off before the orc get him. Beyond that, if you wanted to start looking at the actual missions from the game and stuff, the quests from the game, have you going to Fornost and you have to try and capture, free Belaram from being captured. So once you've freed the eagle, he becomes an ally that you can call on, and you could do some kind of cool special rules for when Belaram flies in to help you during scenarios and that kind of thing. It would take a little bit of work to kind of work all these together, but I think it would break down into a really awesome kind of set of scenarios for use in the game. What I might do actually with this document is I might try and break that down away from the role-playing side of things and try and do it with the Middle-earth strategy battle game in mind, and try and work around some interesting rules that I think would be good for it, and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it would break down into a really awesome kind of set of scenarios that you could play out. Now, obviously, you're going to need to have your hands on some miniatures, and so I did a little bit of digging around on the Games Workshop website, and I found some miniatures that I thought would work quite nicely. So, for example, I thought this would be a pretty awesome miniature for the elf character. Now, she doesn't have a staff, but you could either sort of kit bash it and give her a staff, and instead of Arwen's sword there, Harafang, or just keep her with the sword and just paint her up in a different way. I think if you painted her to match the red that we see in some of the imagery and stuff, I think that would be quite nice. Although, of course, here, as you can see, she's wearing a lot of blues and purples and greys. Just change the hair to blonde, I think, and you've pretty much got it nailed, I think, which is kind of cool. So yeah, some interesting stuff there. The dwarf character, so Farron, was one of the characters that I thought was really easy to find a model for. So you've got the King's Champion miniature there, which was one of the ones from the Khazad Doom range, and I thought he was a really good fit for that. I think he works really nicely. You could maybe cut off the top of the helmet there, perhaps, but maybe if you want to try and use him for your actual games, you want to leave it on and stuff. But painting him up, I think he'd look like a very epic version of the dwarf from War in the North. That'd be quite nice. Now, the human character, the ranger, was a little harder to get my head around, because he's an archer. Okay, so you need to go with a bow. But he also can go like full heavy armor and sword and shield if you wanted to as well, which is kind of interesting in most cases. And, you know, they wear lots of helmets and that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, they don't have them on the web store now because they've gone out of rotation. But I was actually thinking that the sort of Rangers and the Dunedain would actually be a pretty good option for him to use on the tabletop. You'd find one of the, I think the 6 that they did in total, you'd find one of the 6 that I think would be a really good shot for it. The other option was to maybe go for one of these, the Rangers of the North, because I think this guy in particular, at the back, if you can see my cursor swirling around his head, would be a really awesome version of him. I mean, this one's quite nice, I think, because it gets the hood and cowl and gives you the mysterious look, and you've got the bow out and you've got the sword to the side, which is quite nice. This one obviously has the spear at the ready, but what I'd do is I'd maybe chop off the spear and give him a sword. Well, chop off the spear arm and give him a sword arm, I think. You'd have to kind of remove the sword from the scabbard there, otherwise it would look a little bit weird, maybe. But I think either of those two would actually work quite nicely because they're a little bit more fancy, and they kind of work more with the two characters that we have already in the collection, which I thought was quite nice. Miniatures-wise, you know, one of the interesting things about the range, well, the game, sorry, is that it uses the aesthetics from the movies for everything, which is something I mentioned at the start there. And so that means that a lot of the kind of orcs and goblins and stuff that you'll be using would match up really nicely to what already exists in the game. There are lots of other different creatures and things that you'll come up against as you're playing, but you could use, for example, the Army of the Dead would be a really good option for when they're fighting through the Barrow Downs. That would be a nice way to do things. Urukai and Orcs, they're all fairly similar and kind of match up with what you already have in the game, which is quite nice. And then you've got slightly more esoteric stuff as well. So I had a look at some of the miniatures that I thought would be really nice picking out. So, you know, these Barrow Wights are still amazing miniatures. And if you wanted a reason to pick them up, then maybe looking at something like recreating War in the North would be a really fun way to go. And I think it would be nice to bring these models out and use them in your games and stuff like that, and use them as the different miniatures in the game. The Borodur troll miniature, I think, is one of the best miniatures that they did, and kind of, again, looking at the Angmar range, it you know, it kind of makes sense of what we're doing here. But this troll model would be a really fun way of sort of adding sort of big nasty monsters into the game as well, and using them in what you're doing as well. So yeah, just a couple of interesting miniature options there. If you're looking to go beyond that, then the Games Workshop range as a whole is pretty good. Just use the Morannon Orcs or the Urukai or the Goblins and things, and that kind of fills in the gaps for all of this stuff. The only miniature that I couldn't think of anything that would be really good for it is Argandar himself. So we've got a couple of pictures of Argandar here, which is quite cool with his helmet and stuff like that, and his robes and things. And then there's another version of one of the sorcerers. I think I'm not sure if that's an early version of Argandar potentially that they used for the game. But I did have a cool idea, and I haven't got the picture here, but I'm going to go and do some live searching for it right now. So one of the characters that I thought would be really good to actually use is him, and this would actually have to be something that you'd have to maybe ask someone quite nicely to give you online. Is there is a particular Nazgul from the Nazgul of Dol-Guldur that I think would be absolutely perfect for him. And let's see if I can find him as we go through here. So one of these in the second set is that, I think, perhaps. Let's keep going. Is it one of these? I can't remember now. I remember now. Maybe it's in that one. No, it's that one at the front. So if we go back to this one. So I think he's pretty good. I think he's got some of the vibes. All you'd do is you'd paint him up with red underrobes and a red cloak, and I think that would be quite a nice match. Comes with his big axe at the side there. But if you wanted to go for a sword version, I think you could do with using this guy would be quite nice. This guy would be quite nice. Either one of the, well, any of those three I think would be a really good fit for what you want to do with it. I mean, a lot of people will probably want to run with the sword, I think, potentially with these characters. That's also not a bad one that could be used for it. Not this one. I've always thought this was the derpiest one. Oh dear. But anyway, this one I think would be quite nice as well. Obviously, no one's going to be spending £119 to buy one model, but if you can find each of these individually online somewhere, or if you can convince someone to give it to you, I think you'd find a pretty good model that could be used to represent Argandar on the tabletop. You just got to go with a little bit of a different paint scheme in order to bring him to life and stuff on the tabletop. So yeah, I think the main challenge for it is to try and I'm going to put this on in the background while we're chatting away. I think one of the main challenges for it is trying to get it to a point where you'd be able to break down the scenarios in such a way that you'd have some fun with it. I think the challenge would be trying to balance all the scenarios, although there's never necessarily a reason to have to balance everything, I think, when you're playing a game like this. one of the cool ways I think it would be fun to approach it is to maybe use some kind of injury rules between games or something. Because one of the things that was quite interesting about War in the North was that it was very brutal and visceral, and like limbs came off and went flying everywhere and all that kind of thing. And so maybe you could put some interesting stuff in there which played around with the characters and how they get injured and stuff like that, and bring in rules for kind of bringing back their might and will and fate and that kind of thing within games. I always wondered whether or not it would be interesting going through the idea of making them larger than life characters, so using some of the stat lines that already exist in the game and using that as a basis for it. Because obviously I've talked about the miniatures and stuff, but it's always a little bit different when you start throwing into the mix, the longevity of these people against smaller numbers of enemies and that kind of thing. Or larger enemies, I suppose, larger foes. One of the ways I think it would be fun to do it is to maybe use them as kind of like Heroes of Fortitude level style characters. So play around with the idea of maybe running them as kind of captains, maybe. So maybe a captain or a ranger, I guess, because they're all individual heroes, really. Or you could maybe run down the route of putting them together as and use what would she be? Would she be like a Stormcaller perhaps, or just like an Elven Mage? Maybe if you tried to pick one of those characters from the what am I trying to say? If you pick one of those characters from the list, I think that would be quite nice. So if you went into sort of like looked at the stuff from LotR, or you looked at the things from Rivendell and use one of those characters as the basis behind what you're doing, I think that would be a fun way to do it. So, but yeah, I thought it was just fun thinking about what you could do with the game and sort of where you'd take it. I think the idea of running it maybe as a 1 versus 1 thing, or maybe you could do it as a 4-player adventure. So you could have 3 people each taking control of their characters, and then you'd have one person who plays all of the enemies. Or of course you could do it as a 2-player thing, and you could have someone playing with, all of the heroes, and then you could have someone taking on the role of the bad guys. And their sort of idea is that the idea would be that the story would keep going through and continuing and developing. But as you played through, maybe the evil characters would get more benefits and stuff like that as you were playing through it. I think that would be quite a nice way of running the campaign. But yeah, some interesting stuff to think about when it comes to sort of taking things in a different direction, and sort of considering how you might bring in other properties and make use of the Games Workshop line in different ways. Like I said, I think these would be fun little models for you to play around with and use in your games, and it would be nice to sort of look at things from a scenario perspective and how you'd break it down. I mean, obviously, as I said, I did it here for the role-playing game here, but it would be fun to sort of cap that into maybe like a, I don't know. I mean, how many parts were there to the game? There are six parts to the game. So 6 scenarios doesn't feel like a massive amount of stuff that you'd have to worry about. You'd just choose the biggest, most impressive scenarios you could think of from it and stuff like that, and then sort of take it and do it in that way. So that first one, nice and simple one, rescuing Halbrand or Aragorn or whatever and bringing him to Bree. I think that'd be quite fun to sort of get you introduced to it. Freeing Balaram and getting him would be a nice one. The next one introduces the stone giant Bagrazar. So maybe tone that down from a stone giant and have it as like a pretty nasty troll. Maybe use like a troll hero, sort of backed up by some what would you say? Some orcs and goblins and things, and maybe some Uruk-hai, and play around with that. I think that'd be quite a nice way to go. Then you go off to see the dwarves in Nordinbad. So in this one, they start to actually introduce a dragon, which is Urgos. So that's a perfect reason to pick up that really fun dragon that came out, that was available. I think it's still available in Finecast material, actually, isn't it? But it would be nice to add that into someone's collection and use that as a way to maybe do that as kind of like because in the game that's kind of a siege sort of thing going on. So it'd be kind of fun to sort of break out like a wave defense style affair for those scenarios. Then you've got sort of going off and dealing with more dragony stuff in fortresses and taking out stuff, and then you've got the final bit where you confront Agendaur at the very end on Khan'Dûm. So I think that would be quite nice to sort of dive into. But yeah, it was just something that came to my mind recently over the last little while that I thought would be fun to bring up. I would imagine that someone somewhere has done some conversions or has at least made some characters that would reflect the ones from War in the North. I know that we've seen a lot of people doing versions of Talion from Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War and stuff. And I've seen a couple of those popping up on the likes of Reddit and that kind of thing. But yeah, let me know if you've ever tried to do something like this before, how you might approach putting together scenarios for the game and how you might break it down, how you would tell the story, how you'd play with the different heroes and things like that. If nothing else, I think this would be a really fun sort of hobby project. I think it would be really nice to do the characters. I'd love to pick up the various sets to make those characters, make Agandar if I can get my hands on that particular Nazgul model, and then maybe pick up an eagle, do Balaran. That would be quite nice. And then yeah, just generally have a nice little collection of miniatures that you could be like, oh, these would be fun to use in something else. Even if you didn't structure anything around a particular campaign based on War in the North, trying to do the narrative side of things, imagine that as a really fun sort of battle companies setup. I think that would be really cool. You could even do battle companies as the way to play this out, actually, which would be quite nice. But there we go. Just some random thoughts that have been rattling around in my head in terms of taking something like War in the North and turning it into something to play on the tabletop. Find some miniatures. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What miniatures would you choose for the different characters? You know, what kind of table builds would you do? How would you structure scenarios, as I was saying, all that kind of thing. I'm sure some of you will have some very, very good ideas as to where you'd take this. As always, thank you very much for watching. Make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. There is also a Ko-fi link down below if you would like to do some donations, but you don't have to. The most important thing to me is diving into the videos and into the comments and just having a nice chat about what all of you folks are up to, what you think of my videos, and yeah, what you enjoy about the hobby and everything in general as well. So yeah, very good stuff. Right, I'm gonna go off and start thinking about something else. It's probably going to be Middle-earth related. Who would have thought it, eh? And yeah, I'll be back with another video next week. So yeah, I'm going to do the awkward look off to the side as I think about stopping the recording. And yes, bye-bye. Have a think about some War in the North and the characters you might play games with. Bye!